The room was tense, but no one expected what came next. With cameras rolling and every microphone live, Marjorie Taylor Greene leaned forward, her voice dripping with contempt. "This man," she sneered, jabbing her finger across the table toward Zohran Mamdani, "doesn't even represent American values. He represents foreign interests. He represents people who don't belong here." The words hung heavy, striking like a slap. The chamber went still, a silence so sharp it cut through the air. You could see the smirks of Greene's allies reveling in the cruelty, waiting for the sting to sink in. For a moment, it felt like the oldest trick in politics was working again. Reduce someone's identity to an insult, strip them of belonging, paint them as an outsider. Eyes shifted toward Mamdani. Was he rattled? Would he lash out, stumble, or fall into the trap Greene had laid so many times before? Viewers at home felt the knot in their stomachs tighten. This was more than a jab. It was a smear that echoed centuries of bigotry, the kind meant to silence and intimidate. The crowd leaned in, holding its breath. Greene sat back, satisfied, certain she had landed her blow. But the silence that followed wasn't surrender. It was anticipation. Because when Zohran finally spoke, his words cut deeper than anyone imagined. To the casual observer, Greene's outburst may have sounded like another headline-grabbing jab. But beneath the insult was something far more dangerous. This wasn't just about one politician trying to humiliate another. It was about defining who gets to be considered American at all. Greene's smear carried an old familiar poison, the idea that only some identities are legitimate, only some lineages are welcome, only some voices deserve the microphone. And that's why the room felt so heavy. Everyone understood this wasn't a passing insult. It was a shot fired in the broader war over belonging, a battle that has gripped the nation for years. Greene positioned herself, as she so often does, as the self-anointed guardian of real America. Her performance was meant to draw a line in the sand, to tell millions watching that people like Zohran Mamdani could never truly cross it. But here's where the story changes. Because Mamdani didn't just carry his own identity into that room. He carried the weight of countless others, immigrants, workers, Muslims, South Asians, first-generation kids who have heard echoes of that same accusation their entire lives. His very presence challenged Greene's performance. He didn't need to shout or match her venom. His calmness alone disrupted her narrative. And so, when Greene launched her attack, it was never simply about one exchange. It became a symbolic clash between two Americas. One rooted in exclusion and fear, and one rooted in dignity and pluralism. Every listener, whether in the chamber or on a phone scrolling Twitter, could feel that weight. Because this wasn't just a clash of words. It was a battle for the very idea of what America is, and what happened next would push that battle into uncharted territory. For anyone who has followed Marjorie Taylor Greene's rise, her smear against Zohran Mamdani was no surprise. This was her playbook, sharpened over years of shock politics and soundbite warfare. Greene built her career not on legislation, but on provocation, finding the cameras, stirring outrage, and making herself the loudest voice in the room. To her, visibility was power and cruelty was currency. From the start, Greene cultivated an image of defiance. She mocked school shooting survivors. She toyed with conspiracy theories, amplifying fringe ideas that most politicians would never dare whisper. She labeled colleagues traitors for disagreeing with her, attacked immigrants as invaders, and painted anyone outside her ideological bubble as an enemy of the state. The pattern was clear: divide, insult, dominate. And for a time it worked. Cable news gave her constant coverage. Social media algorithms rewarded the spectacle. Greene relished her role as the villain others loved to hate. Every time she was condemned, she spun it as proof that she was over the target. Every time she belittled an opponent, she grew bolder, convinced that volume alone would always win the day. But her arrogance carried a flaw, a blind spot she could never recognize. She mistook fear for respect. She confused attention with influence, and she underestimated those who refused to play her game. Again and again, Green thrived when her targets fought fire with fire, when they met her venom with anger, when they let her chaos pull them off balance. That was the arena she controlled, the script she knew by heart. Yet even her allies began to notice the cracks. The more Green shouted, the more obvious it became that her bluster masked a lack of substance. Her opponents no longer looked weakened. They often looked dignified in contrast to her noise. And when Green crossed paths with people whose identities embodied the very diversity she attacked, her tactics revealed their ugliest edges. That's what set the stage for this confrontation with Zohran Mamdani. She expected another easy win, another moment to belittle and dominate, but she had miscalculated. This time, her target was not playing the role she had assigned him. Green's usual script, provoke, dominate, overshadow, was about to fail spectacularly. Zohran Mamdani's story doesn't begin under the bright lights of a political hearing or in the glare of a cable news camera. It begins in the quiet resilience of an immigrant family that crossed oceans in search of opportunity. Born in Uganda to Indian parents and raised in New York, Mamdani grew up in the vibrant mosaic of Queens, surrounded by voices and faces that reflected every corner of the globe. His life was proof of the city's promise that belonging is not determined by ancestry, but by contribution, by community, by care. From an early age, he witnessed the sacrifices that defined so many immigrant households. Parents working long hours, neighbors pooling resources, families stretching dollars just to make rent, while still finding ways to give back. These experiences shaped his politics not as an abstract theory, but as lived reality. He knew firsthand the sting of being treated as other, the sideways glances at his name, the suspicions whispered at his faith. Yet he also knew the power of solidarity, how people from different backgrounds could lift each other up. Before entering politics, Mamdani worked as a housing counselor, helping tenants navigate the labyrinth of evictions and landlord harassment. He wasn't chasing headlines. He was chasing justice, one family at a time. He saw the fear in a mother's eyes when she faced losing her home, the relief when she realized someone was willing to fight for her. That's where his calm style was forged, in listening, in patience, in refusing to let chaos overshadow compassion. When he eventually ran for office, few gave him a chance. He wasn't wealthy. He didn't have the establishment machine behind him. But he had trust, built door by door, block by block, conversation by conversation. People voted for him not because he promised to be loud, but because he promised to be steady. That steadiness became his signature. In debates while others blustered, Mamdani stayed composed. While opponents swung wildly, he stood grounded in facts and principle. His calm wasn't weakness. It was strength disguised as restraint. And that strength made him uniquely dangerous to someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene, because Greene's entire performance thrived on dragging opponents into the mud, on making them angry, on making them stumble. But Mamdani had spent a lifetime resisting exactly that trap. He had faced down landlords with a sneer, bureaucrats with power, systems designed to intimidate. He had learned that the surest way to win was not to raise his voice, but to raise his ground. So when Greene turned her attack on him, assuming she could reduce him to a caricature, she didn't realize who she was dealing with. He was not simply a politician in that moment. He was the embodiment of every immigrant family who had been told they didn't belong, every underdog who had been underestimated. And when Greene tried to drag him into the mud, Mamdani's answer would instead lift the room into silence. The seconds after Greene's smear felt like an eternity. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of expression. Greene leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, lips curled into a smirk. She knew the script: humiliate, dominate, bask in the silence that followed. And for a heartbeat, it looked like that silence belonged to her. But then the tension began to shift. Whispers ran through the crowd, a low current of unease. Reporters scribbled furiously, sensing a moment bigger than the usual noise. Greene, noticing the eyes fixed on Mamdani, pounced again. "Oh, what's wrong? Cat got your tongue?" she jeered, her laugh sharp and mocking. "I'll tell you what's really happening here. People like him want to change America, tear it down from within, and we're not going to let that happen." Her words were louder now, more performative, aimed not just at Mamdani but at the cameras she knew were streaming every syllable. She thrived on interruption, on never letting her opponent breathe. Each insult was a stone hurled, meant to provoke a reaction. Any reaction. But Mamdani didn't flinch. His hands rested calmly on the table, his gaze steady, his breathing even. He didn't rise to match her volume. Instead, he let her fill the air with noise, her voice climbing higher, sharper, more desperate. The contrast grew cinematic. Green, frantic and sneering. Mamdani, composed and unreadable. The unease turned to anticipation. People leaned forward in their seats, waiting for the inevitable counterstrike. Every insult Green hurled made the silence on his side heavier, more deliberate, like a spring coiling tighter and tighter. Green's smirk faltered for just a second. Her voice, now shrill with overconfidence, cracked as she repeated the same line she had used countless times before. She was used to rattling her opponents by now. But this one, he wasn't biting. And that was when the room itself seemed to change. The silence was no longer hers. It belonged to him. The crowd could feel it. Something was coming. Something measured. Something sharp enough to slice through the chaos. The crowd braced for his response. But no one predicted just how devastating it would be. When Zohran Mamdani finally leaned toward the microphone, the room seemed to inhale with him. His voice, when it came, wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was calm, steady, the kind of tone that forced people to lean closer, to listen harder. "Representative Green," he began, pausing just long enough for the silence to thicken. "You say I don't represent American values." His eyes didn't waver. "But my story, and the stories of families like mine, are American values." There it was, the reframing. He didn't dodge her insult. He claimed it, turned it, polished it into a badge of dignity. He spoke of parents who sacrificed everything for the chance to build a life in America. Of neighborhoods where immigrants stitched together the fabric of community. Of how his identity wasn't a weakness to hide, but a strength to carry. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, applause breaking at the edges before swelling into a wave. Green shifted in her chair, lips tightening, but Mamdani pressed on. "You talk about who belongs here. Yet I've spent my career helping families keep their homes, while too many in this chamber have spent their careers protecting landlords who evict them. You warn about so-called foreign influence while corporations pump billions into your campaigns. If we're going to talk about threats to American values, let's be honest about where they come from. No venom, no raised voice, just the quiet exposure of hypocrisy." Cameras caught Green's expression flicker, the clenched jaw, the forced smile. She was being stripped of her script, denied the shouting match she craved. And then came the moment. Mamdani leaned back slightly, allowing the silence to return, before delivering the line that would echo far beyond the chamber. "You say I don't belong here, but Representative Green, I am the America you pretend to defend." The words landed like a gavel strike. Gasps turned into cheers, a burst of applause breaking through the chamber's decorum. Reporters' pens froze mid-sentence, their eyes darting up in disbelief. On social media, clips of that single sentence were already being clipped, captioned, shared. Green opened her mouth to retort, but nothing came out. Her smirk faltered, her eyes darting toward the cameras, as though begging them to cut away. But they didn't. They lingered, recording every flicker of discomfort as Mamdani's calmness exposed her bluster. And he wasn't finished. "This country is stronger not because of exclusion, but because of inclusion. We are more resilient not when we vilify difference, but when we embrace it. That's the America my family believed in when they came here. That's the America I serve today. And that's the America millions watching right now still believe in, no matter how loudly you try to tell them otherwise." The applause rose again, louder this time, as if the crowd itself had been waiting for someone to finally speak those words out loud. Green shifted again, tugging at her blazer, her eyes narrowing. But the damage was done. For once, the cameras weren't recording her as the loudest voice in the room. They were recording her silence. And as the room erupted, Green's mask of confidence began to crack. The moment Mamdani's words left his lips, they didn't just echo inside the chamber. They detonated across the digital landscape. Within minutes, clips of his takedown flooded Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. The line, "I am the America you pretend to defend," was repeated in captions, scrawled across memes, stitched into remixes with swelling orchestral music. Hashtags like Kraki America, Isolofus, and Mamdanimic Drop began trending, pushing Green's insult far down the feed. On TikTok, teenagers lip-synced Mamdani's retort, overlaying it on footage of immigrant families, graduation ceremonies, and community celebrations. On Twitter, journalists called it the defining moment of the hearing. One commentator wrote, "Green swung with hate, but Mamdani countered with history, and history won." Even late-night comedians jumped in. One monologue replayed Green's smear, then cut to Mamdani's calm rebuttal, pausing the clip just before his one-liner to tell the audience, "Get ready for the knockout punch." The crowd roared, and the clip went viral all over again, and then came the memes. Green's frozen expression, caught mid-smirk and mid-crack, became instant internet currency. Someone superimposed her face onto a crumbling statue. Another turned the moment into a wrestling gif, Green theatrically falling to the mat as Mamdani stood tall. Humor did what it always does in politics. It sealed the narrative in the public's imagination. But it wasn't just comedy. Prominent figures weighed in. Civil rights leaders praised Mamdani for turning an attack into a lesson. Writers spoke about the dignity of his calm. Even international outlets covered the exchange, framing it as a story of democracy pushing back against demagoguery. For immigrants across the country, the moment was personal. Comment sections filled with stories. "That's what my parents taught me." "I've heard Green's words my whole life, but seeing him respond like that gave me hope." The validation was electric. Viewers realized they weren't alone in their outrage, nor in their pride. Meanwhile, Green tried to claw back the spotlight, posting furious statements online, doubling down on her smear. But the internet had already moved on. In the public eye, she wasn't the provocateur anymore. She was the punchline. Yet while the memes and applause gave people their release, something more enduring was beginning to take shape. This wasn't just a viral moment. It was a cultural marker, a story that would ripple far beyond the week's headlines. But beyond the memes, something deeper began to take hold. In the end, the clash between Marjorie Taylor Greene and Zohran Mamdani was never just about two people trading words. It was about two visions of America colliding head-on. One vision leaned on fear, on exclusion, on drawing lines between who belongs and who never will. The other rested on dignity, the quiet, unshakable belief that courage and truth are stronger than any insult. Mamdani's calmness was not passivity. It was strength, the kind that refuses to be dragged down, the kind that answers hate without becoming hateful. In a political world addicted to shouting matches, his composure became revolutionary. He showed that real power isn't found in the loudest voice, but in the clearest one. For every immigrant who has been told they don't belong, his answer was validation. For every family who has sacrificed in the shadows, his words brought light. And for every American who wonders if decency can still triumph in public life, Mamdani provided proof that it can. The moral was unmistakable. Hate may dominate headlines, but dignity endures. Anger may spark a crowd, but truth builds a nation. Green's smear was designed to humiliate, but instead it elevated the very values she tried to diminish. Mamdani didn't just defend himself. He defended the idea of America as a place where service matters more than ancestry, where principle outweighs prejudice, And, perhaps most importantly, he reminded people watching at home that they are part of this story too. Every act of calm defiance, every refusal to bend under cruelty, every choice to answer insult with integrity, these are the choices that push history forward. That is why the moment resonated far beyond one chamber, one viral clip, one trending hashtag. It resonated because it tapped into something universal. The longing for a country where justice is louder than arrogance, and where every person can stand tall without apology. And the lesson of that night still echoes today. Marjorie Taylor Greene set out to smear Zohran Mamdani, to reduce him to a caricature, to frame him as an outsider. But instead of breaking him, she revealed the hollowness of her own performance. His calm answer didn't just dismantle her attack. It turned her arrogance into a mirror, reflecting back the weakness behind her words. This is why the title rings true. MTG smears Zohran Mamdani. His calm answer destroys her attack. Because in the end, it wasn't Greene who defined the moment. It was Mamdani, standing steady, proving that composure can shatter cruelty, and that truth spoken with dignity can silence even the loudest voice in the room. That's the moral clarity we carry forward. Arrogance collapses under the weight of truth, and calmness is not the absence of power, it is the very definition of it. So here's the invitation. If you believe dignity is stronger than hate, if you believe calmness can triumph over cruelty, then join us. Subscribe. Share this story. Be part of the movement that insists America is big enough, strong enough, and just enough for all of us.